About a month ago, I made a whole video about just how bad I expected the film adaptation of White Noise to be, and it feels so good to be completely vindicated in those expectations. It's time for some good old-fashioned internet talk. I usually try to keep things pretty positive, but not this time. I hate what this movie is, and it does a god-awful job of communicating the value of the novel that it's based on. And worst of all, as I expected, Noah Baumbach's White Noise is defined by an overwhelming sense of self-importance. That said, I did enjoy getting the chance to watch a movie that I hated so thoroughly. I mean, it's been a while. So if you'd like to hear me rip on this movie for a while, stick around. Okay, so I don't want this to be mean just for the sake of it. A big part of why I despise this movie is that the project itself feels like an enormous missed opportunity. If you missed my previous video on the subject, which I wrote after only having seen the trailer for White Noise, the gist of it was that I have some very serious problems with Don DeLillo's work in general and with White Noise in particular, and it seems like Baumbach was essentially forwarding and amplifying all of those problems in his adaptation. So literary fiction as a category of published work already has some serious issues when it comes to accessibility. And in my opinion, it doesn't need to be that way. Similar to art house movies, for example, there's a lot to love within this category. A lot of the work is genuinely sophisticated, and sometimes it's complex, but that doesn't mean that it can't be enjoyed by mainstream audiences. Problem is, this work and the people who talk about it, they rarely break into the mainstream. Most of the time, it stays locked away in walled gardens, gets published and distributed and talked about in spaces both real and virtual that do little or nothing to attract people who don't happen to come from a background that includes exposure to these spaces and this kind of work. I mean, even the New York art scene in general just sucks, in my humble opinion. I'm not saying the community has intentionally become an exclusionary hive of elitist, overeducated, multi-generational wealth babies, but a lot of those descriptors hold true nonetheless. This here film adaptation of White Noise was one of those rare opportunities to bring mainstream attention to the work of an influential writer, a writer who excelled specifically at critiquing key aspects of modern life and consumerism in clever and funny ways. I may not be crazy about DeLillo's work, but I respect it, and I think if more people were checking his stuff out for the first time, then they might also end up exploring the work of other, much better authors who wrote about similar subject matter. And guess what? This movie took that opportunity, blew it to half-mast, and just hit the road. I don't think there was ever a moment in this movie when I didn't feel like it was peering down its nose at me from behind a pair of tiny heirloom opera glasses. Jesus Christ. Let's lay out the plot at the very least, because I have a feeling most of you guys haven't actually watched the movie yet, and I don't recommend giving it a look at all. There's a family. The dad of the family, who's also the main character for some reason, is the head of Hitler studies at the local college, and even that little joke is a good example of why the adaptation just doesn't work. Because in book form, you see something like Hitler Studies written out, and it gives you a good idea of the story's tone, as well as its approach to critique. It's meant to be some ribald commentary on academia, I guess. And in the novel, I think it works just fine. But in the movie, it doesn't really work just as a line of dialogue. If anything, the way that they present this feels like really awkward exposition. The character actually says something like, "Oh, it's been X number of years since I started the Hitler Studies program."
I realized it was 1968 I started the Hitler Studies program.
And that was such a terrible sign of things to come. There were so many other ways to communicate that information. I mean, heck, in the very first shot where we see this character, he's got all this crazy like Nazi and Hitler memorabilia all over the walls of his office. We get it. We also get plenty of clues later on when this guy proceeds to deliver lectures exclusively about Hitler and talk a bunch about the upcoming Hitler conference.
Hitler.
Like, we get it. Why leave in that terrible line of dialogue? Like, is there no trust that the audience will understand these things unless you point to them over and over again? And I'm sticking on this specific point because the movie is littered with awful dialogue that is executed terribly. And I'm not trying to say that the performances are terrible. Adam Driver is a fine actor. Don Cheadle is a fine actor. Greta Gerwig is very bad in this movie, but in general, she's a fine actor. But Jesus Lord, the dialogue in this movie. First up, there were far too many moments when I recognized direct quotes from the novel. And if direct quotes organically fit into a scene in a film adaptation, then cool. But these just don't fit. Not one of them. Every single time they feel awkward and out of place, probably because they've been shoehorned in. Why have they been shoehorned in though? Well, I'm guessing because the screenwriter, who also happens to be Noah Baumbach, has a lot of affection and respect for the original work. I mean, he must. He made the darn movie, and I doubt that there was anyone pushing for a White Noise adaptation right now. But that word adaptation is a very important one. Adaptation does not mean copy-pasting stuff from the original work. I do not get the sense that anyone looked at this script and wondered if it would work as a movie. The filmmakers here really wanted you to hear specific lines of dialogue and even excerpts of narration from the book because they really want you to know just how clever this is. You must be made to understand the genius of Don DeLillo. This even applies to how audio is mixed in certain scenes. There are these really embarrassing scenes where the leading man, who shouldn't be the leading man, is chatting with fellow faculty in the cafeteria, and it's, oh my God, is it rough. They're just trading like witty observations and sardonic takes at breakneck speed, and these conversations feel so unnatural for multiple reasons. First, the pacing of their delivery is just too fast. It makes it hard to follow stuff. And the dialogue on its own is way too polished to feel anything close to natural. And it would be okay if it didn't feel natural if the movie's tone was more like heightened or whimsical, but that is not the tone of the movie at all. It's a mix of like realistic and relatable, but also weird. It doesn't work. And then the audio mixing, given the camera placement in these scenes and what we know inherently about normal human conversation, we shouldn't be able to hear every character with perfect clarity. And yet that is exactly what we get. Every word of every line from every character in these scenes sounds like it was recorded in a sound booth, and it's honestly jarring.
Incessant bombardment of information.
The flow is constant. Words, pictures, numbers, facts,
Wait,
graphics,
to get our attention.
waves,
We want them.
particles.
We need
This is
them.
where California comes in.
In fact, this reminds me of some of my least favorite moments in Marriage Story, where crowds of background characters clumsily deliver exposition, I guess just to catch us all up on story developments. It didn't feel necessary at all. So in one scene, it's like the theater company trading exposition. In another scene, it's an entourage of entertainment industry people.
Pilot was serious, or she's moving this way?
Charlie said she and Henry are coming back to was on TV filming the show.
So I guess Baumbach just thinks this is a good idea. I do not. Let's just leave that there for now. So the lack of adapting in this adaptation extends to story structure as well. I would not say that White Noise, the novel, has a structure that's an especially good fit for a 3-act movie. So one of the jobs of adapting such a novel for the screen would be to adapt it to fit that structure, unless you just straight up want to make some kind of crazy experimental movie that's 5 hours long and doesn't have a 3-act structure. That didn't happen here. There was no adapting. So if you watched the trailer and thought to yourself, oh, this is going to be a movie about some like fumbling suburbanites who have to flee from a cloud of toxic vapor, you will be surprised to find out that here in the movie, just as in the book, the airborne toxic event, as it's called, is just a small chunk of the whole story. Now, again, I think that works just fine in the book. The airborne toxic event actually does stick around through the whole story in spirit, at least when we start interpreting its symbolic significance. But here in the movie, we just have chunks of things happening. And thematically, I guess that's all right. It's ultimately a movie about the fear of death and how we choose to live our life. Cool. But that doesn't keep the second half of this movie from feeling flat and anticlimactic. Again, it feels like so much of the movie is just window dressing. It's just a backdrop for key moments from the book to play out, almost all of which are just very long character monologues. After a while, I just started counting down to the next big monologue.
Narrative plots that are a part of children's games.
The oven aroma of bread combined with the sight of a bloodstained man. Collisions are part of a long tradition of America.
Do they think this is just television? Don't they know it's real?
I answered the ad and was interviewed by a small firm doing research in psychobiology.
And hey, if these had been really excellent monologues that played really well on screen, then hooray. It still might have felt like an undergraduate acting showcase, but I'd be down for that. Instead, nah. Some monologues are unacceptably boring, even when they're delivering key character information. Other monologues just feel laughable in how seriously the movie presents them. Example here, Don Cheadle, who's trying to forge an Elvis studies program at the college because, oh ho ho, I mean, isn't that just the perfect encapsulation of how Americans so often seek to elevate what is ultimately very disposable, transient pop culture? So Don Cheadle asks Adam Driver to come to his Elvis class and talk about Hitler for some goddamn reason. And Adam Driver proceeds to overact his way through the scene as the two professors go on to draw parallels between Elvis and Hitler. Now, I know that the internet has a pretty high tolerance for really stupid and overreaching comparisons, especially in the form of video essays. But if somebody started talking to you about how Elvis and Hitler shared a number of largely coincidental and inconsequential character traits, would you take them seriously? The correct answer is no. That person deserves to be laughed right out of the laundromat. That is the kind of thing you might say to a buddy your freshman year of college after accidentally getting either very high and or drunk while ironically watching Moulin Rouge for the third time that week. Like I said at the top, the movie insists on taking itself seriously, even with its marginal attempts at humor. And when a project takes itself so seriously, when it so clearly thinks that it is clever and relevant and impactful, the risk of getting called the P word really starts to loom large. That's right, pudgy. No, wait, that's just what I wrote on my mirror the other day. The word is pretentious. I don't think that pretentious is the most useful word when it comes to media criticism. It can easily become a catch-all for complex work that the reviewer just doesn't happen to like. So they write it off, it's pretentious, don't worry about it. But I also see the value that this word has when referring to work that has a higher opinion of itself than anyone else does. I know that it's speculation. I've never met the people who made this movie. I don't know them personally, but I cannot escape the sense that they really thought this was a good movie, that it was a smart movie with a lot to share and plenty of style. I just don't think it's any of those things. And if I'm right, if this movie really is flat and dull and self-congratulatory, then the movie and its makers start to look pretty out of touch. A perception that was solidified, in my mind, during the end credits sequence, which is a half-assed choreographed dance number in a grocery store set to a perfectly mediocre song from LCD Sound System. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the only people who still care about LCD Sound System all have 401ks and lighting fixtures from Restoration Hardware. And the really weird thing is that I think I'm supposed to be the target demographic for this movie. If this movie is trying to play to anyone, it's trying to play to moderately well-read liberal arts alums. I mean, heck, you want to know who else was in the theater when I went to see this movie? White guys with glasses and their ethnically diverse girlfriends, and white guys with glasses who came alone. And it even failed on that front. It even failed with that really specific niche audience. On paper, this thing is tailor-made for me, but it just sucks. I want to return this movie for store credit. As a refund, maybe the great Noah Baumbach can make a half-decent short film about ice cream cakes or something. That'd cheer me up. Or even better, get Wes Anderson to do it. Then we'd at least get some joy out of the thing. Stupid shit.